Hi! Welcome to Film Fanatics. We are three film geeks discussing movies both new and old. My name is Dan.
Justin is my name.
Joe, I'm.
This is a bit of a weird backwards podcast this week for April Fool's Day. Joe came up with the idea to run all of our movies in reverse, so we're going to end with the biggest new release, which is Divergent. And in between, we'll also take a look at the new Muppets film, a surprise hit Christian film, Justin's pick for old classic The Princess Bride, and in honor of that film, we've got our top 10 cult comedy films. So first up is our Oscar A to Z film, and that is Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, a 1974 film nominated for 3 big awards. And that was Ellen Burstyn, who won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Diane Ladd was nominated for Supporting Actress, but lost out to Ingrid Bergman. And it was also nominated for Best Original Screenplay, but lost out to Chinatown. So, good year for movies, apparently.
74, yeah.
Yeah. So, let's kick it off with Joe. Alice Doesn't Live Here.
A 1974 comedy-drama film directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Ellen Burstyn, and has some early appearances by Jodie Foster and Harvey Keitel, two favorites of mine. After Alice Hyatt, played by Burstyn, discovers her abusive husband has been killed in a car accident, she decides to go on a road trip to Monterey, California, to return to her roots and make it big as a singer. She hopes to succeed so she can raise her son Tommy, played by Alfred Lutter. Along the way, she tries to get a job as a lounge singer, but gets caught up in a relationship with Harvey Keitel, who turns out to be as psychotic as her former husband. She then gets a job at Tucson, where she becomes a waitress, among a delightful cast of characters who reside there. It is here she meets David, played by Chris Christopherson, who might be a man who might actually be worth keeping around. Scorsese does an excellent job once again, bringing out some believable performances from a very witty script. What really carries the film is honestly the acting, with nearly every cast member giving an amazing performance, and delivering some very well-written dialogue, provided by Robert Getchell's script. This is a down-to-earth and fairly bold commentary on a strong feminist ideal in a tough male-dominated society, especially for the 1970s. Most importantly, Alice is a character we can sympathize with and love, primarily through her rapport with Tommy, who, due to Lutter, is an absolute delight. I enjoyed this film a great deal, and I have no real problem with it, other than I really would have liked to have seen more, which apparently it was an inspiration for a TV series, so perhaps I can see more. So, I'm going to give this film an A.
Very nice. Yeah, it's funny. Just this week, with The Wolf of Wall Street out on DVD and Blu-ray, Entertainment Weekly ran a half-page article about the comedic side of Scorsese and mentioned Alice, and there's even a picture of Alice in the article. It's pretty much as straightforward of a comedy as Scorsese can do. And when I was little, I remember the sitcom Alice that you just mentioned, which is based on this. It ran for 9 years, and though I had no idea it was based on a film until we were about halfway through watching this one, I remember it being very funny, and despite its long time on the air, it hardly ever aired in reruns afterwards, and much like the film version has sort of been erased from pop culture. I don't know a whole lot of people that really talk about this movie either.
But it must have been a hit because it was on for a long time.
Yeah, the show, huge hit. I don't know why it didn't, even like TV Land doesn't air reruns. I don't know what happened to it, but I feel like it's the same with this movie. Like when you talk about all the Scorsese biggies, this is one of the best I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
You know, so it's a shame it's not part of the conversation. But Burstyn is so great as Alice, and though she makes some bad decisions, it makes her all the more real. And you're absolutely right about her son. Alfred Lutter is amazing in this, takes the purposefully annoying kid character to a whole new level. The supporting cast shines as well, and those that are supposed to be funny are hilarious, and those who are supposed to be threatening or nasty fit that bill as well. Scorsese is still very much finding his style and tone, and of course comedy isn't his forte anyway, but the directing here is decent as well. Some scenes set feminism back about 50 years in the first hour of the movie, but that doesn't make it less real. In the 70s, women like this, especially in more rural areas like this takes place, I mean, it was kind of the norm. And like Joe, I give Alice an A.
Oh, nice.
Definitely one of the best Oscar nominee movies we've seen since the beginning of the show.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Justin, what'd you think?
Director Martin Scorsese has been known for his gutsy dramas with edgy characters, and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore is no exception to that rule. Through his lead actress Ellen Burstyn, the audience gets a character that's every bit as frustrating with her choice in men, but also sympathetic in her struggles to find a better life with her son, who has some of the best lines in the overall film. It shifts between comedy and hard-hitting drama without feeling episodic, and while it's easy to see how the later bits in the diner inspired the sitcom Alice, it doesn't feel out of place or overly goofy. Overall, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore was an unexpected, welcome treat that shows how some movies truly do deserve to be Oscar-worthy, and I give it an A as well.
AAA.
Triple A. We don't get that very often, and I don't think ever with the Oscar nominees.
No.
With like
maybe Adventures of Robin Hood.
Adventures of Robin Hood, and I think About Schmidt.
I don't think they're all exactly the same.
I think I might have given that an A-.
I believe you did, yes.
Yeah.
Robin Hood, I actually gave an A+.
I did as well.
Same?
Okay,
Yeah,
so AAA+ on that one.
It's funny, when Joe mentioned doing the reverse show,
oh no,
it was mainly because we always end on such a down note with these crappy Oscar noms, and this week we have like one of the best ones ever.
Funny.
So it's just ironic. But yeah, this is definitely one that people should seek out.
No question.
You know, one of Scorsese's earliest, and like I said, for me, one of his best.
Easily.
Yeah.
Very good one.
All right, well, let's move on. Not much more to say about that great movie. Up next is The Princess Bride, and that was our old classic for the week. Justin brought that to us, so he's going to tell us why.
For this one, I was trying to look for something that would be a good companion piece for Dan's last entry of Pinocchio, and since I knew that he had some reluctance towards this one because it's overly quoted, I thought it'd be interesting to see how this one goes. But let's get to my synopsis and review. Wesley, played by Cary Elwes, is a young farm boy working for Buttercup, played by Robin Wright, who goes away in hopes of being able to marry her when his ship is attacked by the notorious Dread Pirate Roberts. 5 years later, when Buttercup has tried to move on and has been reluctantly engaged to Prince Humperdinck, played by Chris Sarandon, she ends up getting ambushed by Vizzini, played by Wallace Shawn, a giant named Fezzik, played by Andre the Giant, and the ever-clever Inigo Montoya, played by Mandy Patinkin, and ends up getting rescued by Wesley, who's now a swashbuckling hero in black. Great family films have strong writing that offer up a narrative that can entertain adults as well as children. In the case of Rob Reiner's The Princess Bride, it's hard to think of a film that accentuates this better. The fairy tale storyline, paired with the playful read-through of the novel featuring Fred Savage and Peter Falk, is entertaining, funny, and most importantly, realistic, particularly with how Savage's character reacts to the overall story. In an hour and 38 minutes, the film runs smoothly, offering up a plethora of exciting and memorable adventures amidst a fantastic ensemble. Admittedly, the film does skirt the boundaries of falling into melodramatic cliché at times, but yet it still manages to fit the tone of the film rather well. Overall, The Princess Bride is a fun, timeless film that stands among some of the best family-friendly fare out there, and I give it an A.
Joe, Princess Bride.
All right. The best thing about this movie are the colorful characters and the awesome one-liners that they utter. Princess Bride has such a dapper charm about it that it seems to be almost a throwback to simpler days of Hollywood and the beauty of childlike imagination. Throw in some good performances and rather smart humor for adults, and you get a corny but still rather enjoyable ride. There is just so much warmth in the film and kind of unrivaled honesty. In all honesty, it didn't really pack as many punches as when I watched it at a younger age, but it's still a decent family film with some cool characters and dialogue. And I can see to some extent why it would have a decent amount of cult status, and it is definitely a special family film for a lot of people, and that's quite understandable. The central characters are just really memorable and awesome. But I'm going to leave this one with a B.
Oh, wow. Just because you remembered it a little more fondly than on the rewatch?
Pretty much. I mean, I remember I only saw it one time, and I really did like it. I really did. But this time, it just didn't have as much punch for me. I don't know why.
Okay. I believe we have mentioned on one of our shows in the first season that I've never seen this movie, and I never really was intending to. It's one of these movies that has been so built up by people to me since I was a kid, really. I've basically spent the last 25 years avoiding it because of that. Its reputation and cult status so precedes it, and the iconic lines have been quoted to me for so long that there was no real possible way that it could live up to the hype. And it does not. I know people who list this as their favorite film of all time, and I, for one, personally don't see it, but due to the nature of the build-up, it would be hard for me to anyway. It's definitely good, though. It's not dated. The actors play their parts very well, and especially Wallace Shawn and Cary Elwes and Mandy Patinkin help carry the movie. with some great cameos along the way as well. I very much enjoyed the Billy Crystal, Carol Kane bit. The fight scenes are well choreographed, and the interstitials with Fred Savage and Peter Falk, though bordering on actually too cutesy, do hold the story together well. I still, of course, don't see all the hype, but it is far from an average movie, and I will give The Princess Bride a B+.
I can live with that.
I've never seen a movie that is so lived up to the hype. There's actually one coming up I'll talk about a little bit in our cult comedies top 10 that actually did come pretty close, but that film was nowhere near like the build-up for Princess Bride.
Fair enough.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, I can understand where you're coming from. It is a movie that is often quoted. We don't even think it's as quoted as much as it is, but it definitely gets
It's one of those that certainly spans the generations too, because I think there's kids now that watch it. Like I say, it's not dated at all, so I'm sure they get probably the same experience. Well, and you guys were, I mean, it came out probably 10 years before you guys watched it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'm glad you brought it, Justin.
You were a trooper. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I definitely was going to go out never seeing this movie in my life. But, you know, now at least I can say I've seen it. You know, I think there's definitely better 80s adventure movies. Like The Goonies, for example, would be a go-to.
That's actually one I need to rewatch, to be honest with you.
Yeah, Goonies is really good. That's one I haven't seen probably in a while. And I'm not sure if it does hold up quite as much as it did when I was a kid. Because that is more of probably a kid's story. Princess Bride is more of a family story. Mm-hmm. And it's a completely clean movie, too. I mean, there's nothing offensive in it.
No, I mean,
whatsoever.
Violent at times, but definitely
a little bit. But I mean, it's like comedically violent. It's not really. I mean, there's certainly not a lot of like bloodshed or anything.
I don't know. The pain machine's a little disturbing for some small kids. Maybe.
A little bit, yeah. If you're really young, I guess. Mm-hmm. But if you've been a holdout like me and you've never wanted to watch The Princess Bride, I say go for it.
Absolutely.
Speaking of the old classic slot, next week we're going to have a listener's choice old classic. And that is going to be In Bruges. We're going to talk about that next week. And that was from listener Marcus. So,
though, if you guys have other ideas, please feel free to send them out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, every month we're going to be doing this. So if we didn't pick yours this week or this month, there's still plenty of time. It will actually go into our pile for next month. And if you have more in mind, definitely, like Justin said, let us know. All right, well, up next is our new classic of the week, and that is a film that's been released in the last 2 years. And this week, that's The Kid with a Bike. In this French-language film, Cyril, played by Thomas Doré, a preteen boy in foster care, goes on the hunt for his estranged father and lost bike. A woman named Samantha, played by Cécile de France, that he meets as he's on the run from his foster home, decides to take him in, and they realize together that his father truly wants nothing to do with him. Cyril becomes angry and starts acting out at home and falls in with the wrong crowd, specifically under the wing of a boy named Wesker, played by Egon Di Matteo. And Samantha has a hard time controlling him, especially when he starts doing illegal activities. This is a heartbreaking tale that, though is complete fiction, could easily be true. Children that grow up in foster care often deal with these types of issues: abandonment, anger, a need for acceptance, and much like the kids portrayed in Short Term 12 that was on all of our year-end lists for 2013, Doré's portrayal of Cyril is so powerful because it rings so true to life, especially with the emotional range. Also heartbreaking is Samantha's struggle to know what to do with him. The soundtrack and score to Kid with a Bike really set the proper tone of the film as well. My one complaint about it would be that everything happens so quickly that you're left wondering what's next for Cyril and Samantha and what of these so-called friends that he's made. Its 87-minute runtime could have easily been expanded to address some of these issues and some others, but overall it's one of the better foreign films in recent years, and I give The Kid with a Bike an A-. Justin?
Very nice.
Thanks.
The Kid with a Bike's greatest strength comes from the fact that it has a firm grasp on what it is and what it is trying to do, and stays within these boundaries without feeling necessarily constricted. It's largely a tribute to neorealism as made famous by Italian filmmakers in the 1940s with a very plausible story that never feels hokey by any sort. Thomas Doré does a fantastic job as the troubled Cyril, having to deal with the awful thought of his father not wanting him, and Cécile de France complements this as a hairdresser trying to take care of him despite Cyril's overall reluctance by acting out. It's not always the most pleasant viewing experience, especially when dealing with one of the consequences of Cyril's actions later on in the film. But in under an hour and a half, The Kid with a Bike makes great use of every dramatic beat it has at its disposal. Overall, the film is a great, hard-hitting story with much to appreciate, and I give it a B+.
Joe?
Well, I can say honestly that I loved the gritty realism of the film. It's shot and paced in a way that really make you feel like you're in a situation which is actually occurring. The simplicity of this is really veiled under a great deal of subtext, all revolving around one boy's journey to retain his childhood. We see everything from bad parenting to the struggle of the foster care system to even a little bit of the criminal underbelly. Many children could very easily end up in such a depressing situation, and this film is really very telling of that. Still, the hyper-real nature of the film does leave some of the plot points kind of unresolved. Perhaps that was the film's intention, but I still would have liked a stronger resolution. Other than that, I can say that it's still a very worthwhile experience, and I give it an A- as well.
Nice. So Justin, what were your sort of complaints with the movie?
Like you mentioned, I think if it had even had like 20 minutes just to flesh out a lot more of the story, I could have easily given it an A- or an A.
Yeah, everything sort of falls by the wayside at the end. There's this event that takes place, and then afterwards, it's just like, that's the end of the movie.
You feel like there's so much more that we could say.
Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, I basically made that statement. You guys disagreed with me, I thought, but it seems like we are in agreement about that.
Yeah,
so
once
now,
I thought about it,
because you guys were like, no, it says everything to say. I'm like, really?
Well, I mean, personally, I didn't have as much of a problem with the resolution. I just felt like more time to flesh it out would have made it better. I was actually okay with the ending.
Perhaps if there had been more in the center of the film, maybe the ending would have made more sense. But I still feel like there's definitely more that could have been expanded on somewhere.
Yeah, and I don't even feel that the conclusion of the movie was all that unsatisfying. I just would have liked to have seen a little bit more after the fact. It just sort of happened, and then roll credits.
Yeah.
If the film had ended with that shot that it ended on, like those last few minutes, I'm fine with that if that was technically the correct ending. But in any particular situation, I'm like
in the
middle, or maybe this couple scenes before that. Like, I have no problem with the literal ending,
right?
But it still felt like there were some unresolved issues that could have been resolved, even in the hyper-realized style. So I still feel like there's something they could have expanded on somewhere.
But at the same time, it's also sort of a component of neorealism. The fact that, okay, yes, you're not necessarily going to get a fully fleshed out story, but it's true to life.
Even in life, there's still stuff that happens afterwards.
Right.
And I mean, admittedly, you have this context of keeping it in a box. It's like snippets of moments, which I do understand that. But even so, you could have still had more scenes with more moments that are still not taking away from the realism.
Either way, it's a great movie. We all graded it very well.
Yeah, I mean, it does what it does well, but I still feel like it could have expanded a little more.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
Definitely.
And now we agree with you.
Even though you didn't
further
originally. Yeah.
Well, sometimes it takes a little bit.
It does.
Reflection always helps.
You guys come around and be like,
Well, and the other thing to remember is that was our second time seeing it.
Think we'll ever get the sequel?
Not likely.
Man on a motorcycle? No? Come on. He grows up and somebody steals his motorcycle.
That's a possibility.
Tries to find his son. I mean, it's parallels.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind going back to the characters.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All right, well, up next, we're going to do our top 10, and that is inspired by The Princess Bride, one of the big cult comedies of all time. We're going to count down our top 10 cult comedies. All right, and for this list, we had a little roundtable discussion of what sort of defines a cult movie, and we couldn't really come to a full-on consensus, because I don't think anybody really can.
No.
But we sort of went off of the concept that it's a film that maybe wasn't a success upon initial release at the box office, and then upon home video or repeated cable showings, it grew this sort of cult following. And a great example that is not a comedy, so we won't bring it up today, but is Fight Club, which did not do very well in theaters and obviously became a huge hit after the fact. So there's sort of a little template for level of success, I guess. So, all right, well, let's start with your list, Justin, with the top 10 cult comedies.
Okay, to start this off, I want to go with my honorable mention. Obviously, The Room is comedy gold for anyone who's seen it. However, at the end of the day, it's still attempting, quote-unquote, to be a drama. But if you haven't seen it, well worth the hilarity. There's screenings all over the place, and I have to make my honorable mention on those grounds.
Definitely a cult movie.
But getting onto my list. Number 10, Eating Raoul. I just thought this was a hilariously entertaining dark comedy. It's completely outrageous and rightfully so. And just one of those films that you don't necessarily talk about, but whenever they actually get there, it brings up some seriously good times. Number 9, Heathers. Just one of my favorite 80s comedies. I think Christian Slater is truly at his finest here. And while I do think it becomes a little bit of a thriller by the third act, and one could argue whether or not Mean Girls sort of rendered it obsolete, it's still a ton of fun to watch. Number 8 is one that I didn't really think was a cult comedy until I started looking up contenders, and this was on the list, and I thought it was a great movie, and that is Harold and Maude. I thought this was a really touching and engaging romantic comedy drama. It hits home a number of really, really poignant themes, such as death and dying and learning to cope. And although the film may not have the cult following that it once had, its influence is still all over the place. I'd say at least once a year I see a movie that utilizes the song If You Want to Sing Out, Sing Out. Number 7 is a little bit of a nostalgic one for Dan and I, and that is Clerks. It was originally our first selection when we started having movie nights together, and although I consider the sequel to be better, and I do realize I'm in the minority on that, it's hard to deny the following the original has. My number 6 is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Now, truth be told, you can probably put just about any Edgar Wright-directed movie on this list, but Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is pretty much in a league all of its own. Although it didn't do well at the box office, the cult following this film garnished is massive. I liked it on Facebook almost immediately once I heard about it, and I'm still getting postings saying there's screenings for this movie all over the world. And it's just so wonderfully wacky and campy, it's hard to imagine not seeing this movie with a crowd. My number 5 is Super Troopers. It's complete and utter scattershot comedy, yet it's surprisingly effective, and there's so many moments of hilarity that it's really well-deserved of being considered a cult hit. My number 4 is The Big Lebowski. It's just a great comedy scenario with the world's unlikeliest of heroes, aka the Dude. Bridges, alongside the rest of the ensemble, is great fun, and it's just so much bizarre lunacy, complemented by the Coen brothers' quirky style, that it almost beckons for fans to dress up for theatrical one-night showings. Number 3 is one that has been on one of my lists before in Season 2, and that is Airplane. It's unquestionably one of the most quotable movies ever. It's got so many great moments, and as long as you don't eat the fish, life is good. And my number 2, one that is probably considered to be one of the most popular of the cult comedies, and that is the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's an iconic film that was meant for parties, albeit I have yet to attend one, but I'm hoping to in the not-too-distant future. The following is as big as it ever has been, and it's just campy humor at its finest.
Yeah, there's one that just doesn't go away.
Absolutely not.
The cult following. I mean, that's almost like the original cult classic movie when you think about it. It's been going 30 years strong here, and the following's as strong as ever. I did not put any of the Airplane, Naked Gun. Those were all sizable box office hits, so I sort of left those off my list. Airplane obviously has a huge following, but yeah, I just sort of didn't put it on because of its hit status. And actually, my honorable mention is the same, and that's Beetlejuice. I think Tim Burton, most of his movies, at least, probably not these days, but most of his movies in the first, let's say, 10 to 15 years of his career, Edward Scissorhands, Cry Baby, I mean, these are all cult movies. Whether they do well at the box office or not, Tim Burton is sort of the king of the cult movie. Well, one of them anyway. You could argue there's a few. You mentioned Edgar Wright. Kevin Smith is certainly one. John Waters is certainly one.
Oh, yeah.
So, my number 10 is Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. This is a movie that doesn't get talked about very much, But to people from my generation that grew up with this movie, people that have never ever even seen it can quote a couple of the lines just because for whatever reason they nailed the crap out of the trailer on TV. It was like every show you watched, you saw 3 trailers for Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead.
I've
Never seen it either.
Yeah, it's a Christina Applegate movie from the early 90s when she was still on Married with Children.
Okay.
And it's like not a role reversal movie, but she basically, their parents leave, babysitter dies, so it's up to her to run the family. So she fakes a resume and gets like a high profile job, and it's actually not that far from Secret of My Success, I suppose, in some respects. But number 9 is I'm Gonna Get You, Sucka. This is an early Wayans Brothers films, long before the Scary Movie days, and actually before In Living Color was even a TV show. This was out in the late 80s and didn't make a huge dent at the box office, but basically it's a send-up of blaxploitation movies, and they employed a lot of the stars of those movies to come be in the parody. Chris Rock has a very early appearance in it as well. It's just a very funny movie. And fun fact, it's the reason I bought a DVD player, because the VHS had been out of circulation for a while and I couldn't find it anywhere, but they had just released the DVD. So I said, well, that's it. I'm getting a player.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's how much I like that movie. My number 8 is Heathers. This is the movie I was referring to when we were talking about The Princess Bride. This had been quoted to me for years, and the legend of Heathers kept growing. And finally I saw it probably about 10 years after it was out, and it did stand the test of time for the most part. Justin's absolutely right that the last part is very weird and gets like too thrillery as opposed to comedy, but it's still very good. Great Winona Ryder role. Number 7 is Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. Now, when you think of Austin Powers, you don't necessarily think of box office failure, but in 1997, when this came out, it only made about $53 million in its entire run, which only 2 years later, the sequel opened to more than in its initial weekend.
Wow, that's
crazy. When Austin Powers came out on DVD and VHS, it was huge. People that didn't want to shell out $8 or whatever to see it in the theater caught it on video, and that's when all the quotes started happening and the impressions. My number 6 is Mallrats. Great Kevin Smith movie, his second film. I'm not sure if it's as good as some of the other ones, and there's actually still one coming up on my list, but for me and my friends, it was certainly one of the most quoted ones, because it came out in my freshman year of college, so it's kind of all the rage. Number 5, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. It's a shame this one actually didn't do that well at the box office, because we always think of it as such a big hit, but it really didn't. Still gets quoted a lot. Great performances by Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, and of course George Carlin.
It's true.
Yeah, as Rufus. And the sequel, not bad either. You've mentioned that, I think, on the show before.
I actually liked Bogus Journey.
Bogus Journey is probably even more of a cult hit because it was less seen in theaters. But some people like it even more than the original.
It does some things better.
Yeah. My number 4 is Office Space. I think you can probably put Mike Judge in this category as well, of the cult directors. Idiocracy, Extract, even to some degree Beavis and Butthead Do America. These are all cult movies, but of course the cream of the crop is Office Space. I'm one of the handful of people that actually did see this in theaters and loved it, and a couple of my friends saw it in theaters and hated it, which is, I guess, explains why it wasn't much of a theatrical hit, but its legend grew, of course, with the constant airings on Comedy Central and with DVD sales. My number 3 is Clerks. This is, for me, the crowning Kevin Smith achievement. I actually saw this one in theaters as well at the Art House in Philly, where I grew up. And we didn't really even know much about it. We just thought it looked kind of cool. It was in black and white. We were like, hey, let's go. And, obviously its legend precedes it. My number 2 is Reality Bites. This is a movie that we've talked about on the show just a few weeks ago, that it doesn't really stand the test of time. But again, to my generation, it's definitely a cult movie. Everybody saw it. Ben Stiller's directorial debut. Great performances from people like Ethan Hawke, Winona Ryder, and Janine Garofalo. So that sits at my number 2. All right, well, now Joe's going to give us his 10 through 2. Very excited.
All right, well, I'm not entirely sure if all these are big hits. I don't think there's any box office breakers here, but
Okay.
I guess we'll find out. But I'm also going to start this off with an honorable mention because you guys both did that.
Sure.
And that's definitely Troll 2. This movie, I only saw it recently just to see if it lived up to some of the hype, and it is an amazingly bad movie. It's brilliant. It really is. It's just, it's great. I highly recommend it. It's one of the most quoted bad horror comedies ever. I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but either way, it's just great.
I've seen the making of film. Have you ever seen the documentary?
I've heard it's actually
Best Worst Movie.
I have thought about seeing it. I've heard it's a good documentary.
Really interesting. And I'd never actually even heard of Troll 2 when I saw it. I just thought, okay, it sounds interesting. It's a cool documentary.
Let's put it this way. Originally for Guilty Pleasure Month, I was thinking about it being my first run.
Wow.
But I wanted to build things up, so
Okay.
I didn't want to start off too strong.
That would have been very hardcore.
It would have been a little hardcore, but maybe a little too obvious, too.
Yeah,
so,
true.
But it might come up at some point in the future.
All right.
My number 10 is a movie that Dan hates.
Ooh.
But it's also kind of at the bottom of the list because it doesn't have a huge cult following, but it does have a cult following for a very small, specific group of people, and that would be Fanboys. It is a fun road trip movie, pretty much geared to hardcore Star Wars fans, but I really enjoyed it, and a bunch of my friends did too.
Yeah, that's definitely a cult movie for Star Wars, huge, Star Wars nerds.
Admittedly, though, it's pretty much exclusive to Star Wars nerds, and
Yes.
to some extent Star Trek ones, though it's more hate-filled towards Star Trek, which is one of the things that kind of bugged me about it.
Sure.
So, didn't really understand that, but still, I do love that movie, and it does deserve a spot on this list. Number 9 is actually Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey.
Nice.
I contemplated putting the first one on, but upon some recent reflection, I actually do think I enjoy this one more. I think it really tops a lot of the original bits in the first film by taking the characters into really ridiculous new directions, and a lot of great homages to older classic films like The Seventh Seal, among others. I mean, Death being one of the great companies, going to meet God, different dimensions, aliens. It's like, how could he beat time travel? They kind of did. And Keanu Reeves is at his finest there. So my number 8 is Clerks. You guys have both mentioned that. It's just a really, really well done film. I think it's one of those films that really deserves all the hype that it gets. It's just so witty. It's so smart. It does a lot with so little. Mm-hmm. And that's just really impressive. And I think that does show a lot about Kevin Smith's talent as a director.
Completely original.
It's completely. And it's so down to earth. It's so real. And it's not really that dated. It really isn't.
No, not at all.
And I mean, it's got a lot of great topics. Some of the best dialogue in that film.
And uber quotable.
Very.
You could name, really, just pick any line out of the script and someone that's seen that movie will know exactly what movie it's from.
It's because it's stuff that you honestly could hear in everyday conversation. Yeah. That's why I think it sticks so well in people's minds. My number 7 is actually another Kevin Smith movie. I don't think it might technically be as good as Clerks, but I've always liked it more, and it wasn't really I think it was towards the bottom of the list for a long time for me, but I watched it a couple times and realized that it really speaks to me a lot as an individual, and that's Mallrats. It's just
nice.
Being just a comic book dork, I think that this really, really brings me back to my teenage years, hanging out in the mall, nothing to do, just getting into ridiculous escapades. Just, I don't know. I don't think I'm that much like the Jason Lee character,
No.
But he does remind me of some friends that I've had, and it really does speak to me a lot. It's also, honestly, one of my favorite Ben Affleck performances.
He does a good job in it.
It's up there.
He's a good antagonist, and he just plays it so well. And it's just another really fun movie, and I couldn't take it off the list because it has, by far, the best Stan Lee cameo ever.
That's true.
No question.
Number 6 is Rocky Horror Picture Show. This movie's so iconic. It's awesome. It's a great blend of a lot of different things I love. Horror, science fiction, musicals. Tim Curry, hands down, best role. It's his best role. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just nobody wears stockings like that man. It's true. He just pulls it off so well.
Rocks it.
It's just a great musical. It's definitely up there for me. I love it. And my number 5, Justin, I believe you mentioned the Blood and Ice Cream trilogy. And if you guys know me, I would have to pick one, and that would be Hot Fuzz.
Yep.
Now,
Good choice.
I will admit, I think that Shaun of the Dead is probably a bigger cult hit. I think it probably sticks more in people's minds, but Hot Fuzz definitely resonates more with me. I love the play on action movies. I also do like the kind of strange, darker twist that it actually unveils. It's a really, really solidly layered plot. We did talk about it on the show, so I won't go into too much detail about it, but I love that movie. It's definitely my favorite of the Edgar Wright films. Number 4 might be the most successful film on this list, and that's Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, probably.
Probably, but I still think that it definitely deserves iconic status.
Yeah, I mean, certainly its reputation
It's
as a cult hit would precede any sort of theatrical take it had.
definitely one of the most quotable movies ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those films that I can just watch over and over again, and all the jokes work. I never get tired of them, but it definitely works better when you're watching with people. It's a great party movie. It's just a lot of fun, a lot of witty banter. John Cleese, one of the great leads, one of my favorite British comedians. I love that guy. That mustache just destroys everything. But yeah, I love it. Number 3, Tim Curry makes a reappearance,
Really?
and that's Clue.
Right. Yeah, sure.
This movie is one that you can just watch over and over again, watch it from different perspectives. It actually has a really good mystery, and, well, once again, just great performances, great chemistry, a bunch of actors. Not much I can really say about it, but it's one of those films that I didn't think I'd want to watch because it's based on a board game.
Right.
I mean, one of the few game-based adaptations.
Yeah, we've seen Battleship.
Oh
no.
Anyway, it in a way, it kind of does prove that you can actually do something from such a basic concept and really expand on it and make it a really decent film. And it's one of the ones that snuck up on me because I'd heard about it. People said they liked it, and I just believe I picked it up like for $5 or something one time, and I discovered it, and I showed it to my whole family because I'm like, you guys have to watch this. It's so great, and I got to share it with everybody. And
Nice.
And number 2. Now, there has been a director that has been absent from this list.
Mike Judge.
Yep,
your favorite.
My number 2 is Idiocracy.
Nice.
This film did not get the reception that it should have.
No,
it is
at all.
Just brilliant comedy. Luke Wilson's amazing. There's just so many smart jokes in this movie. It just covers a lot of ground, but it tells a really decent story, which is the thing that Mike Judge does the best. He brings out the best in these really down-to-earth, middle-class characters, puts them in these ridiculous situations, and manages to make it all work. Hilarious movie, great cult hit. More people should see it.
And that one took a few years, too.
That
Because
one-
I was working at a video store when that came out on DVD, and I think we only got like 2 copies. Nobody rented it.
There actually is a bit of a story there because I had to hunt this one down. I remember hearing about it coming out, and I remembered that it was Mike Judge, director of Office Space, and I'm like, ooh, this is probably funny. I'm going to want to see it. And I couldn't find it anywhere because it had such a limited release. Mm-hmm. And I remembered thinking, well, why didn't this get bigger? And I found it on DVD and watched it, and I'm like, I don't understand why it wasn't a hit. I don't get it. I really don't.
This is another one that was, I think, propelled by Comedy Central.
Mm-hmm,
They got the rights to this, and they just aired it like every weekend for months and months.
Glad they did.
And built up that legend. All right, Justin, what is your number 1 cult comedy of all time?
My number 1, Bubba Hotep. Right from the plot itself, this screams cult following. For anyone unfamiliar with this movie, the plot is simple. Elvis and JFK versus an undead mummy. And frighteningly enough, it works. It's easily Bruce Campbell's best and arguably funniest performance. And I'll be honest, the prequel they've been talking about for years definitely needs to get made.
Bruce Campbell's another one, not director-wise, but actor-wise. Just about everything he's in
is great.
Becomes like a cult hit. All the Evil Dead movies.
Mm-hmm. No, that was actually a good pick, Justin. I completely forgot about it. And you know what? I've said this to you before. I think that's his best movie. It's just a really, really good performance. Actually, for a comedy, it actually does have a lot of honest, good dramatic moments, too.
Definitely.
With the ridiculous concept you wouldn't think possible. But if you haven't seen it,
I've never seen it.
I know it sounds silly. I saw the face you made.
Yeah, I just remember the cover of the DVD, and I just thought, this looks horrible.
I honestly...
It's amazing.
I avoided it because it sounded stupid.
Yeah.
It really did. Bruce Campbell piqued my interest, but then I was like, nah, this can't be good. But I was somebody that I was working with that recommended it to me and said, no, if you like Bruce Campbell, check it out. And I loved it.
No kidding.
It's very good. I probably would have put it on my list if I didn't think about it, but it's number 1's a good spot for it. It's very underrated and very good.
Cool. Well, my number one, I don't think either of you will enjoy as much. You've never seen it, Joe, and Justin doesn't care for it, and that is...
Romeo and Michelle?
Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion.
We've talked about that before.
This is another one sort of in the same vein of like a Reality Bites or Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. If you weren't like a teenager in the 90s, I don't think you would really appreciate this movie, or in Joe's case, had ever heard of it before he met me. But it's one of my all-time favorite movies. Janine Garofalo gives her best performance in it.
I do like her.
Yeah, she's fantastic in it. Hilarious. Alan Cumming is great in it. Lisa Kudrow, actually, it's probably, I would say, other than maybe Scream 1, I would say it's probably the best Friends side project movie. Lisa Kudrow gives a great performance. Mira Sorvino as well. The script is great. The laughs keep coming. For me and my friends, it's always been a very quotable movie. It's not one that you certainly hear around town like you would a Monty Python or a Clerks. But to the people that have seen it, I think it really is near and dear to their hearts. So
You gonna run it sometime so I can see it?
I would love to. All right, Joe, what's your number one?
All right, guys, guess what it is. You know what it is.
Another Mike Judge movie, and it's Office Space.
No, it's Beavis and Butthead. Yeah, it's Office Space.
Okay.
Yeah,
Figured.
yeah, my number one's Office Space.
Great choice.
If there is a good spot for the greatest cult hit ever, I still believe it's this movie. I think it's one of the best comedies ever made. I love it. Nothing does office humor better than this movie, and it just has so many iconic scenes. I mean, Vengeance Against the Printer, some of the best characters ever, some of the most quoted lines ever, and one of the best villains ever in Bill Lumbergh, who got with Jennifer Aniston,
Yep.
and just was upsetting everybody. Whether it's waitressing, whether it's in the office, this covers a lot of ground about the troubles in the workforce we can all understand and find a lighter side to.
Which leaves me standing corrected, because Office Space certainly would also go into the blender of best friends alum movie. It's certainly Jennifer Aniston's best film.
Her best supporting role, probably, but I don't know if I'd say it's her best ever.
I've heard The Good Girl is really good.
Well, Good Girl was decent.
Good Girl is good, but I don't know if I'd say it's as good as that.
It's definitely not as good as Office Space.
I liked her in Along Came Polly, too, actually.
Really?
Never saw it.
All right, well, good list all around.
Yeah.
And now we've got our home media moment for this week, and that is Cutie and the Boxer, which is a film that was nominated at this year's Oscars for Best Documentary. And Justin's going to tell us about Cutie and the Boxer.
Ushio Shinohara and his wife Noriko have been married for over 40 years and have very different styles of artwork. Ushio dips boxing gloves into paint as he puts them on and bashes the overall canvas to make a unique painting, while Noriko utilizes a more artistic comic book format that serves as a semi-autobiographical account of her relationship and marriage, with herself being personified as the colorful Cutie and Ushio himself being personified as Bully. The documentary explores the ups and downs of their marriage, dealing with their son who may be suffering from alcoholism the same way his father did, and Noriko's own artistic pursuits. A great documentary needs great subjects, and the Shinoharas are characters in and of themselves. On the surface, the pair seem like a loving, albeit occasionally comic, bickering couple, but the way the two styles influence each other over the course of the documentary is not only fascinating, but also engaging as well. Admittedly, given the film's short running time of 1 hour and 22 minutes, more time could have been spent on other aspects, such as their son's involvement, but seeing how the art and the passion they have for each other has come together for this couple is truly something special, and I give it a B+.
Joe, what did you think of Cutie and the Boxer?
I would say that this is a rather quaint documentary that does tell a rather unique tale about some very interesting people. It feels so down to earth, yet filmed so fluidly that it almost seemed like a fictionalized account. And the reason I say that is not only because that's actually the stylistic power of the film, it's because I honestly forgot that this was a Oscar-nominated documentary. You guys just said, watch Cutie and the Boxer.
Oh.
So I started watching this movie and I thought, wow, this is a really odd movie, because the way these people were acting, I felt like they were characters. So they really were. It took me about maybe, I don't know, a good 10 minutes to really realize, okay, this is a documentary. I honestly thought that it was a narrative, a fictionalized account of something that happened, maybe because of the comic book elements and also some of the weird photo canvases they used. But then it took me a while to realize it. Plus the rather odd opening song just seemed like an artsy film.
Yeah, that was weird.
But so it actually threw me. But that's one thing I thought that was really captivating about it, is that it kind of brings this very real story, but gives it an almost magical element. It really does make it feel more
Very
fictionalized.
cool.
So I can definitely see why the Academy liked it, because it honestly fooled me for a good 10, 15 minutes. It has some of the sharpest camera work I've ever seen, and the content as well was rather refreshing. But I didn't really care for the cartoony exposition scenes about the past events, and while they were fitting with the motifs of the film, I found them to be a bit distracting and honestly kind of annoying. I don't know, it just didn't really work for me. Still, I think that it was an enjoyable piece of history and a fresh commentary on both marriage and the struggles of an artist, and I give it a B.
It's very interesting that you sort of had a unique perspective at the start of it, not realizing it was a documentary. I was expecting a little bit more from this film since it was nominated for Best Doc at the Oscars. Something about it just didn't hit for me. I'm not sure. Like, I agree with Joe that the sort of cartoony...
Montage.
Yeah, like the montages. I didn't really like them either. I appreciated what they were trying to do with it. But so that was one thing. Another thing was I cared so much more about Cutie and her story than Yushio. I didn't find him to be that engaging or likable. The movie covers some interesting ground about love and marriage and culture, but I wasn't invested in his boxing art in the least. And a lot of the film just seemed like I was watching my grandparents, but not like in a relatable way, in a more like a who wants to watch a movie about my grandparents kind of way. I just wasn't that invested. I don't know. It was directed well. I liked her story, but the movie as a whole just didn't do it for me. It's a B- for me.
Huh.
Yeah. Which oddly isn't that off from your guys' grades. I
was going to say...
I seem to have more problems with it than you guys did. I mean, it was shot incredibly well, which speaks to what Joe was saying about how it was
personally,
was realistic.
I felt that the marriage and the cultural aspects and the discussions about his son and the relation to their struggles coming to America and just their relationship, that part of the story I think was compelling. The art stuff was an interesting hook.
Right.
But I do feel that it was kind of pandering.
That's the bulk of the movie. Yeah, like...
It was... I think that... Like I said, I think that was good framing, but I think that they could have definitely expanded more on it, like Justin said, learning more about their characters. I mean, I thought that Hishio was an interesting individual, but I admit that the way he presents himself doesn't make him that likable, but I think that's also saying something about marriage, because she obviously loves him and sees something good in him, which I guess we're supposed to see too. And I liked his style of art. I thought it was interesting, and I don't know, but...
Well, and that's why I sort of mentioned about the culture, too, because their marriage sort of is a reflection of their culture.
It is.
You know? I mean, the woman is a little more subservient, and, you know, I mean, she put her art and her, you know, work on hold for decades, you know, while he did his boxing art and the other kind of weird stuff that he did art-wise.
However, there's still a sort of like feistiness about her character. I mean, her role in the marriage as well.
True, but I have the feeling that has only come out
recently,
in her older age. That's the feeling that I got while I was watching it.
At least they were trying to be honest about it.
And that's the part I liked about it, like the commentary on marriage and culture,
and I mean, even
stuff.
Between the two of them, I felt like when they were being filmed, I mean, I think that they were just acting the way they normally do. They weren't trying to hide anything.
No, that's very true.
Which is something that a lot of documentaries suffer from.
People don't want to reveal too much,
and they just end up playing to the camera.
Which, and I don't think that Hishio cared. I don't think either of them cared. They just were like, "Hey, you want to film us living our daily lives? This is how it is.
Go for it. We're artists."
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I don't know. I thought that it was a very interesting little piece of art history and of the cultural shift of the 70s and 80s, but I don't know. I thought it was cool. But it definitely was lacking something.
Yeah.
It did have some issues, but I still think it was a decent documentary.
I was going to say, I thought it was deserving of a nomination.
Moving on, we've got God's Not Dead, a surprise hit that in less than 1,000 theaters opened at number 5 this weekend. And Joe's going to tell us about God's Not Dead.
God's Not Dead. A Christian drama directed by Harold Kronk, And starring Shane Harper and Kevin Sorbo of Hercules: The Legendary Journeys, Josh Whedon. No, not Joss Whedon, sadly.
That was a weird name choice for him.
I think they were trying to relate to the audience. Ooh.
Maybe.
Played by Harper is a college freshman who enrolls in a basic philosophy class. The widely feared class is taught by Professor Radisson, who is played by Kevin Sorbo, who forces all of his students to sign a statement saying that God is in fact dead. By doing this, it will ensure a passing grade for all who sign it. Wheaton, however, being a devout Christian, refuses to sign the paper out of personal pride and integrity. Radisson then proposes he provides several lectures to prove his point, or else he will essentially fail the class. Due to his need of the class to fulfill his curriculum, Wheaton puts everything on the line for his faith, including the support of his parents and his girlfriend. If this synopsis sounds intriguing to some extent, it is. However, the primary themes aren't really explored enough due to being bogged down by several very weak subplots that don't really add anything to the story and ultimately all go absolutely nowhere. I think we all...
They're all awful.
It was...
Truly.
God, it's just like... And it's funny, I looked up a synopsis just to see if I was right, and no mention of the subplots at all.
No, because why would there be? They're all terrible.
Completely superfluous. All the side characters are either flat or underdeveloped, and not enough time is spent on any of them to really care. I also have to admit I did not like the portrayal of Muslims in the film, with one in particular being a man who attacks his daughter and throws her out of the house because he finds out that she practices Christianity. While it is pandering and obviously a bit biased, this movie actually wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Sorbo and Harper give good performances, and the dilemmas of those characters and the questions they pose were actually somewhat engaging. Still, it ultimately gives into sappiness and a very rushed and convenient resolution, but what can you expect? Sorbo and the main story hold this higher for me than one would expect, but it still is held down by just about everything else, and I give it a D+.
Yeah, you and I sort of
we talked
confabed about this after you had watched it. It suffers from not just the bad acting, almost cartoonish villains, and corny dialogue, as with a lot of the lower-budget, faith-based movies, but its biggest stumbling block, like you said, is an over-excessive amount of these side plots that drag the movie down at every corner. The non-believer reporter woman with cancer, the Muslim girl hiding her love of Christ from the family, the preacher and his friends who can't get their car to start. Like, what? The moron from Duck Dynasty playing himself.
And don't forget Superman.
Yeah, Dean Cain sucks. I mean, I could really go on. And it really deserves a better fate than that, because like you said, the main story featuring Sorbo and Harper is actually pretty compelling. It raises some interesting debate topics and conversations. Obviously, this film wants you to lean one way over the other, but it does present some interesting observations on both sides of the fence.
It tries to be more fair than I was expecting.
Yeah. I have a lot of atheist friends, and they're not as intense about it as Kevin Sorbo.
Oh, man.
But we've had similar-ish talks about this. And, I mean, of course, the movie has the over-saccharine-infested conclusion. I can't fail it, though, due to the appeal of that main plot and its themes, so I will give God's Not Dead a D.
Oh, wow. See, I did like it more than you did.
A little bit. Yeah, you did.
Yep.
Justin?
When it comes to Christian films, I am both amazed and horrified at how productive they are. The fact that these films can be made on the smallest of budgets with only the occasional familiar face is incredible, but often the stories are mediocre at best and the acting is often even worse. What works in God's Not Dead's favor, in contrast of so many others, is that this one has a relatively promising, albeit often unrealistic and over-the-top storyline. The concept of proving the existence of God through scientific theories and faith is fascinating and enticing, but often argued horribly by protagonist Josh Whedon, played by Shane Harper. His arguments are countered by his angry atheist professor, played by Kevin Sorbo, who may very well be the best part of the movie by delivering a performance that almost makes up for the appalling writing. Their classroom debates are intriguing, but few and very far between, with far too much time, as you both mentioned, being devoted to other classmates, who come off not only as cliché, but occasionally even a bit offensive, especially as Joe mentioned, to followers of the Muslim faith. The point of a debate is to argue but respect one's opponent, and God's Not Dead does nothing within those lines, and I give it a D.
I'll give you this, Justin.
We thought you were going to fail it.
You didn't fail it. It's a Christian movie. That's usually the kiss of death. But you gave it a good go. I think, yeah, the debates were not how you should debate, but I think we've all had professors who were a little too high and mighty.
True.
And I think that's
Sadly.
how something like that might have gone.
And I have had those professors. But there's a difference when you're being high and mighty about a topic that usually most people can argue about freely without things getting overly heated. And then there's professors that are openly, A, threatening to destroy a student's career over it,
That bothered me.
and B, openly making one renounce their own faith in entering the class, which just comes off as...
I brought this up, and I was like, I'm sorry, you cannot do that.
Yeah, I didn't understand why he was still a part of the faculty.
I'm like,
at the
I'm
school.
sorry, like,
I have to say
any one of
that.
those students brought that up, he would at least have gotten some disciplinary
Right.
action. Like, you're a professor, you know, I
don't care how tenured you are, you would get a grievance for that.
You know what, though? Joe and I talked about this because there's one scene where his girlfriend, a former student of his, comes to talk to him to break up with him
I was thinking
because
about
she
the
is a
same.
Christian.
that
And,
collagen, man.
But she came up to him while he was on campus and she called him his name, Jeff or something.
Hercules.
Well, yeah, she said, "Hey,
But
Hercules."
only in the bedroom.
And he turns around and he says, you know, "Oh, well, you must address me as Professor so-and-so on campus. I've told you that," or whatever. And Joe and I were just like, okay, you're just a professor. You're not even a doctor at this school, and you can do this to your students? Like, so, well, he had a lot of problems.
He had some
And
issues.
why he was still teaching at this school, I don't know. Why the preacher's cars kept stalling out, don't know.
Well, you don't-
Why...
Some of the worst sound effects ever.
Yeah, those were some bad car sound effects. This film will play well, obviously, for the Christian market. They propelled it to number 5 this weekend with minimal amount of theater space. But I think for the general population, it's more along the lines of where we're feeling it.
Well, you know what?
The writing is not good.
Well,
No.
the writing,
At all.
the writing's pretty bad for the most part. But I am really happy to say that when I saw that Kevin Sorbo was leading the movie and I knew that I had to lead it, I'm happy you guys did basically think he was the best thing about the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Which I thought was pretty
Hands
awesome.
down.
Well, but listen, I thought Shane Harper did a good job.
Yeah, he did fine.
I thought he was fine.
I thought he did okay. His arguments were terrible.
But the acting was fine.
But,
Right, but look, he's a freshman student. His arguments don't... You can't look at it from a perspective of, like, here's what he should have said. He's a freshman in college who
Probably
is
never-
put on the spot to debate his hardcore teacher
Yeah.
which
at the end of the first few classes of the semester.
let's
which I
Like,
understand, but the point of the movie is, okay, we're supposed to see him start out with a kind of weakish argument and sort of end up getting behind him by the end of the movie, which is fine, but he doesn't do that.
I didn't think his arguments were that bad.
I mean,
He wins with an ad hominem.
that's that.
Ad hominem is when you detect what the overall person stands for instead of the actual, like, point.
Yeah, but the whole debate is about what people stand for.
Towards the
Point
end,
being-
he takes it to a different direction by
yes,
saying it's
which is
your
an ad
choice.
hominem.
Okay, but
So you
that was the only way he could get Kevin Sorbo,
To not
like,
fail him.
in the yeah.
Because,
Like, that's the only way he could get him.
Which was a terrible and cheap way to do it, but
well, I mean, there was... With how, like, hardcore the stance was of Radisson, that, you know, there was really no
Yeah.
way he was going to be like, well... And, yes, like I said, that does kind of take it to a less interesting direction. He's saying he does a personal attack on him. Well, why do you feel this way? And then it becomes more about that rather than the actual debate. So I can kind of see where Justin's coming from, but once again, had they not spent like 60% of the movie on everything else, the arguments could have gotten more fleshed out and maybe it would have been less cheesy towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
So, but for the basic like components of his argument, I thought they were fine.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's great debating skills on either side. I'm just saying
Great slideshows.
this is what was presented. He did
get
have
to that.
really good like PowerPoint slide,
I don't
slideshows.
think that was like that's not Windows. I
was
don't know.
impressed with that.
I don't know what the heck that was.
But yeah, I mean, based on the setup and the characters, it seemed like that's probably how it would have gone.
It's pretty believable.
Yeah,
I mean, believable. Still argued in a mediocre way, but
but
That's the
that's
way.
how the characters would do it.
Yeah, like honestly,
So-
I'd say a college freshman trying to pull off that
One-up
argument
his teacher.
against like this, really tenured, awesome
Yeah, hardcore teacher.
professor. I mean, yeah, he's not going to have the best arguments.
All right, well, hey, Justin didn't fail it.
That's good.
That's the surprise of the show, I think. Well, up next, we've got Muppets Most Wanted. This is the first film from any of our top 5 most anticipated for the year, which we did in December. It was my number 1. So, did it live up to my expectations? Well, first things first, I was under no delusion that it would be as good as the Jason Segel reboot from 2011. That was one of the best series reboots I've ever seen and was fantastically original. So, of course, Muppets Most Wanted didn't quite live up to that, but let's see if it lived up to my expectations. Its crime switcheroo plot was fun, but not quite as original or exciting as the first one. The songs weren't as entertaining, and the jokes didn't land quite as often. On its own merits, though, it's certainly far from terrible. The basic plot is Constantine, a Kermit lookalike and most dangerous frog in the world, busts out of prison and conspires to switch places with Kermit and use the Muppets as fall guys for his art and jewelry heists. Some Muppet favorites that had little to do in the 2011 film because they just didn't have enough time to get to have more to do here, a fact which even gets referenced tongue-in-cheek in Most Wanted, along with a dozen or so other hilarious references to that film in true Muppet fashion. But many of those unsung Muppets get a nice amount of screen time in Most Wanted, and it's great to see people like Sam the Eagle and the Electric Mayhem get their due here. There are 3 songs that are truly fantastic, and the others are a little bit less than stellar. The main live actors, Ty Burrell as a bumbling Interpol agent, Ricky Gervais as a co-conspirator of Constantine's and acting manager of the Muppets, and Tina Fey as head warden of the Russian prison where Kermit finds himself after Constantine switches roles, are all pretty good, though sometimes their accents might be a little hard for kids to understand. I was even struggling a little bit with what they were saying at times. But overall, Muppets Most Wanted is mostly good, with great celebrity cameos and self-referential humor, as we've come to expect from the brand. It gets a B from me, which, like the 2011 Muppets, could easily be bumped up on repeat viewings. I've already seen about half the movie a second time. Justin, what'd you think of Muppets Most Wanted?
In the 2011 reboot, Jason Segel penned a script that brought all the magic and wit of the Muppets to a new audience that not only worked, but made everyone excited for what was coming next. It's nice to know that his co-writer, Nicholas Stoller, had no idea what to do without him, and more often than most ends up ignoring everything that was great about the last film. Admittedly, the hilariously self-conscious opening number about sequels is entertaining, but often ends up becoming the stereotypical next installment that they're often playing off for laughs in the song. Walter, who was essentially the protagonist of the original, is basically reduced to being a walking plot device in this one, only ever getting involved whenever the unusually complicated by Muppets standard story needs to get moving. It doesn't help that at one point they actually address this matter, but instead of doing something about it, they rather just play it off for laughs. However, that's not to say that the film is all bad. Tina Fey is fun as Nadia, and often her bits keep the film on steady ground, despite her character being underdeveloped, and it's always amusing watching the endless number of celebrity cameos sneak in wherever they can. Muppets Most Wanted is by no means an awful sequel, but in comparison to such a promising predecessor, it's underwhelming. Here's hoping that if a third film gets made, they really consider getting Segel back to write it and get the franchise back on track. Muppets Most Wanted gets a B-.
That was a lot higher than I was expecting based on that review. It seemed like it was going to be like a C.
No, I mean, there's stuff to like about it. It's just kind of, like I said, it's just really underwhelming in contrast to the really fun, upbeat, entertaining movie the first one was.
Joe, what did you think? Muppets Most Wanted.
It has the same witty writing we've come to love from the Muppets, good song numbers, and doing something different with a spy caper plot. I felt that not all the Muppets got as much attention this time around, which is kind of interesting compared to what Dan said. Maybe I didn't get to see as much of my favorite Muppets this time around, but everybody has to get their just due. Mm-hmm. Though Kermit being the center does sort of make sense, as usual. Tina Fey, Ty Burrell, and Ricky Gervais are all hilarious, and my favorite cameos were easily Danny Trejo, of course, and Ray Liotta, 2 gangsters being gangsters, as always. Most of the others didn't seem to have quite as much bite as they could have, though, in terms of cameos, but I mean, I like the Usher joke, but...
Yeah, that was pretty good.
That was decent. Perhaps they didn't want to bog it down with too many of them and wanted to focus more on the Muppets, but I'm not entirely sure they did that either. I liked the music in this one, but kind of like you guys said, I felt that some of the songs were good and some were not good, to be completely honest. There were some, like, I couldn't understand some of the lyrics sometimes. I felt that the actual the music itself got overpowered like overpowered the actual lyrics of the songs. I had trouble hearing everything sometimes, so I thought it was like a little sloppy in terms of production values there. Overall, it's not as strong a story as the first one. I think that's another thing. I was kind of surprised when you ran it a little while ago, the reboot Muppets movie. I thought that was excellent.
Yeah.
And this one really didn't live up to that, so maybe that kind of tinkered my view of it a little bit. But as the Muppets themselves say, that's to be expected. Still, kids and hardcore Muppets fans will love it, and I give it a B- as well.
Okay, not bad. Which makes sense. I gave it a B. You guys both gave it a B-, and I was a little bit higher on the 2011 one than you guys were, but only by like a little bit.
1 or 2,
yeah, only by a hair. Which, I think stands to reason. I'm a huge Muppets fan. Yeah, I think it's interesting that Brett McKenzie was on board for both movies to write all the songs. So it's interesting that the songs this time around were, I didn't think, up to par with the 2011 version. But some I loved.
I think that some of them just seemed rushed to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's a fair point.
I can see that. To speak to your point about the Muppets not having enough screen time.
Are there too many of them to do it?
Basically, I was just referencing that it was nice to see some of the Muppets that sort of didn't get much to do in the other film have more to do here.
Like Animal.
But yeah, like Animal. I love Sam Eagle. Sam Eagle's one of my favorites.
All right, well,
so it was cool to see him in like a supporting type role.
Sam Eagle was actually a pretty big part of it, but I guess for me personally, Gonzo's like one of my favorites.
Yeah, Gonzo didn't have a lot to do really in either of these movies.
And I wanted to see him play a bigger part because he did have like a fun plot in the first one, but here he had like maybe 2 scenes.
Yeah,
that were big and he was just kind of there.
Well, and that's kind of what happens with all of these Muppet movies. Because there's so many of them, they can only focus on so many. Like Muppet Christmas Carol, Gonzo is a huge part of.
Yeah.
So you sort of do get that, and, like one of my favorites is Fozzie. Fozzie has had a pretty good role in both of them.
Yeah.
But there's been movies where he's not had all that much to do, So... yeah, unfortunately, it just sort of speaks to, like, who's your favorite Muppet, and how much screen time do they get. But, yeah, I don't know if it was Siegel's absence specifically that was the issue, but, like I said, I never expected it to be as good as that one, so I was pretty satisfied with it.
I don't know, I was a little disappointed, to be honest.
Yeah?
Same.
I don't know how kids are going to view this. I think it's maybe a little more for adult fans of the Muppets.
Well, I think kids liked it, but I don't know. I'm not sure.
Because I didn't hear a lot of laughter, other than from me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, we went to a late show. I don't know how many kids were even there, but...
we did, yeah.
I laughed sporadically.
Yeah.
I think I can sum up my feelings about the movie in kind of one sentence, actually.
Okay.
I was thinking this. Most of the best jokes were in the trailer. Personally.
Yeah,
and maybe it's because I saw the trailer so much. Like, I really liked all the jokes in the trailer.
Yeah, the jokes in the trailer were great.
And so I was expecting everything to be that caliber, and I just felt like most of them were like... they were like funny little meta humor jokes I liked, but it was like...
no, I don't agree with that, though. I think a lot of I thought there were a lot of really good jokes that we didn't see. Most of them were references to the first movie. Well, Danny Trejo had a couple of good lines that we didn't see in the trailer.
Good night, Danny Trejo.
Good night, Danny Trejo. I'm a triple threat.
That's true.
A singer, an actor, and a murderer. That was one of my favorite lines of the movie.
Yeah, that was good. Like I said, he probably was the biggest cameo. I actually thought that from the trailer he was just going to be maybe one scene, but
he was actually in it quite a bit.
Probably had some of the most.
He was
screen
in
time.
It probably about as much as Jack Black was in the first one.
Yeah,
which
I thought was awesome.
I thought Ty Burrell was great.
Ty Burrell was great.
Yeah, I thought he had some really good lines too.
They were
that we didn't see in the trailer.
Next to probably Tina Fey, his banter with Sam the Eagle was
oh my god,
spot on.
Him and Sam Eagle were hilarious together.
I honestly wouldn't object if they did a spinoff about them.
No, I would love it actually. All right, and our final movie is Divergent, and this opened at #1 this week, the latest young adult adaptation, and actually a successful one. Based on its box office receipts, much better than the recent ones we've been getting. Oh. And Justin's going to tell us about Divergent.
All her life, Beatrice Pryor, a.k.a. Triss, played by Shailene Woodley, has lived in the diplomatic faction of Abnegation, known for their selflessness. However, when she reaches the age to quote-unquote test and see where she belongs, her results are divergent, unable to succumb to fear and control, and decides to join the militaristic faction of Dauntless, headed by a man known only as 4, played by Theo James. to learn to control it from the eyes of authoritarian Janine Matthews, played by Kate Winslet. In the latest YA adaptation that plays out like The Hunger Games meets The Bourne Identity, I'd really have to give a great deal of credit to the leads of this film, for without them this probably would have received a significantly lower grade. There are several times in which characters are abruptly thrown in for dramatic effect, such as Zoe Kravitz's character as Triss's ever stereotypical smart-alecky sidekick, and the story doesn't make much sense at times, but yet with these actors and actresses, the audience can at least partially ignore the inconsistencies and keep the movie's near 2.5-hour running time moving at a smooth pace. Unfortunately, this doesn't help the rather poorly done action sequences and over-reliance on voiceover that will likely prompt flashbacks for anyone who saw last year's The Host. However, fortunately, this isn't as bad as that, or Meyer's other infamous Twilight Saga, but for the first of what is supposed to be a trilogy, it's honestly just an average start, and I give it a C.
Well, it seems to be very hard for studios to adapt popular young adult franchises from book to screen very well. Just in the past 12 months, 2 of those attempts, Vampire Academy and The Host, received Fs from all 3 of us, for example. But the film that Divergent mirrors most in tone, themes, story, and look is the best of the recent lot, which Justin mentioned, The Hunger Games. Woodley is obviously no Jennifer Lawrence, and former Spectacular Now co-star Miles Teller in a supporting role here continues to be always just playing himself. But Divergent has a clear dystopian premise, and though it takes a while to actually figure out the why, what, and how of it all, it is continually riveting. Not all of the directing choices by Neil Berger are inspired, but most of them work, and specifically the fantasy dream sequences are shot very well. It was also great to see Maggie Q as always, and Kate Winslet playing against type. Not just for a YA adaptation, but for an action sci-fi film in general, I thought Divergent did surprisingly well, and I give it a B+. Joe, what'd you think?
Liked it much better than I expected. This film really has a plethora of strong supporting cast members, many actresses that I like, Ashley Judd, Kate Winslet, and Maggie Q, among others. Most aren't utilized as well as they should be, but they don't take away from some decent performances by the leads, which really surprised me. The action is decent, the visuals are enjoyable, and the pacing is mostly pretty fluid. The story is pretty by the numbers for most young adult thrillers that have come out the past 2 decades. Still, the idea, well, certainly done before, does bring up some good compelling ideas, and a good message that teens can take away from it. Despite taking a little too long to really get to the climax of the story and leading to a rushed and honestly poorly written execution, though now knowing that it's supposed to be the beginning of a trilogy, now I can understand why,
Right.
The bulk of the movie was still rather entertaining, and I give it a B.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is one that easily could stand on its own.
I thought it was trying to.
Without the other 2 volumes of the books, which I don't think you can necessarily say. You could say it, I guess, for the first Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But
Twilight, not so much.
No.
I mean, I only saw the first one, but that can't stand on its own as a singular movie. You need
the rest.
Yeah, well, that actually did help make some sense of it. I thought that the way the pacing was, I thought that was actually flawed. But now that I know that it's supposed to be the first in a series,
right,
that wasn't as big of a deal, and it was supposed to leave some things unresolved. So
unlike these other books that have sequels that are probably never going to happen because of their box office, Divergent actually seems like it will get all 3 movies going.
It did do well?
Yeah, I mean, it opened to about $55 million.
Yeah,
it's at least getting a sequel.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good to see it take another direction.
Sure. And it's getting pretty good audience reviews, so hopefully it'll play out pretty well over the next few weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was, like you said, Joe, it did take a little while to get going, but it's not like it was breaking a whole lot of new ground.
It held together pretty well for me.
Yeah, I mean, it runs 220,
and I didn't feel it.
I was not bored at all. It didn't feel like 220. And I did feel it a little bit in Catching Fire, which we reviewed late last year. So, I think for young adult adaptations, or like I said, just even outside of that, I thought it was a pretty good film.
I mean, like I said, it pretty much does a lot of things that dystopian sci-fi movies have always done in young adult fashion. But considering that, it did it pretty well.
Yeah.
It's pretty solid.
I do think it's clearly trying to ape from the Hunger Games, though. I mean, it is. Its last scene is even on a train,
True, but it still does. The general premise is still quite different, though.
Yeah, oh yeah. In the directing and the just the way it was sort of looking, kind of looked a little Hunger Gamesy, but
that was the
I can't blame
director's
them for
intent.
that.
I mean, it makes some sense. But like I said, I still think that it was still trying to be its own thing. Though I have to say, Maggie Q's character, I liked her, and I do like Maggie Q. Nikita's always good to see. But with the exception of the scene that she was integral to being in the beginning, you could have written her out completely.
Yeah, you could have. She actually didn't need to show up the other 2 or 3 times.
Back, and I'm like, she didn't really need to be there.
But I did like seeing her.
It was nice seeing her.
I thought, it's Maggie Q again.
It's like, oh yes, you're like the person that does the tests, and then what do you actually do in Dauntless? I do tattoos.
Yeah, then she hangs out doing tattoos.
What?
Once again, getting to my point that there are so many moments in this movie where it doesn't honestly make a whole lot of sense.
No, but I mean, I think at face value it kind of does.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that it didn't necessarily make sense. It just wasn't necessary to have her be there.
No, like I said, you could have just had her in the one scene and she served her part, and I was like, oh, that's a good little cameo. But that's just one example. Okay, like it's cool she came back, but wasn't necessary. No, but we learned a little more about what happened to her brother, and so.
And Tony Goldwyn as her father.
Yeah, of Scandal. Yeah, he was also
Scandal and Ghost.
Another good actor that I like. That's right, the bad guy.
He plays the bad guy in Ghost.
Forgot.
Yeah, some of the plots were a little bit, overdone or whatever. But for the audience that this movie is going after, I think it showcases some new ideas for them.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you have little exposure to these kind of things and you're 14, you read the book, oh, I loved it, I get to see the movie, I think it's going to really satisfy people. It's executed well. I have never read the book, but I'd imagine, at least from the feelings I had about it, that if this was the film that was the end product, the book is probably pretty good.
Justin wasn't such a fan.
Not particularly. But, I mean, hey, maybe a sequel can turn it around. Hard to say.
All right, well, before we close the show, in the news this week is that Sony finally made it official that they are going forward with Ghostbusters 3. I'm not sure why it took Harold Ramis to die to actually make the movie, so obviously he's out. Bill Murray is not going to be involved. And original director Ivan Reitman announced after Ramis' death that he would not be directing. He'll still be on as producer and is helping Sony find a suitable director, but pretty much Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson will be the only ones from the original team still in the film. My question is, why bother? But, Joe, what do you think?
People have been talking about Ghostbusters 3 forever. People wanted it forever, and it's been in development forever, supposedly. I think that it should have happened 10 years ago.
Exactly.
At least. I just don't understand why it didn't happen. I know that Bill Murray wasn't crazy about doing the second one. He didn't have a lot of interest in it, but I just feel like there's so much demand for it, and so many people would love it. Easy moneymaker, especially if they had the same team behind it. But for whatever reason, they didn't do it, for a multitude of different reasons. I don't know. But of all the times to actually say, go ahead and do it, I actually am not even excited for it anymore.
Me neither.
Because
I'm actually annoyed about it.
Yeah, I'm kind of irritated by it because, at the very least, we had all the cast members still alive, still around, could come together. And any potential it would have had to be as good as it could be is gone now. Mm-hmm. At least it's sticking with the original crew. Yeah. And I've heard it might be kind of a reboot-ish thing now.
Yeah, I guess what they're doing is it's not going to actually focus on those main guys. Like they were just supposed to kind of make little cameos,
which is fine. But I'm pretty sure that wasn't the original intent.
I don't think it. Not when they started talking about it.
And I mean, I think now with Bill Murray still not wanting to be involved, and even Reitman doesn't want to be involved. And Ramis, died recently, so it seems to me at best we'll get Ernie Hudson, and Dan Aykroyd in a cameo. And I mean, like, yes, it could be a good movie, but it just seems like, if it's been in development for so long now, I don't know if people are really going to care anymore. It just seems like really odd timing,
Justin, what do you think?
Well, I do agree with you both that it's kind of lost its luster of excitement for me, given that it's been in development forever. Bill Murray was obviously a stickler on this one, and honestly was driving me nuts about the development issues with it. However, you got to remember, Harold Ramis, alongside the other ensemble of the Ghostbusters, really wanted to do 3. Rick Moranis was considering to come out of retirement to do 3. And honestly, if it's going for a pass the torch kind of story, a new director that is going to be guided by Reitman, I'm actually cool with it. And I heard in a news report that they're considering Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who did 21 Jump Street in the Lego Movie. I think if there's anybody in our generation that could possibly pull it off in a great way, they would probably be the guys to do it.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on that. If those are the people that are going to do it, that's not bad choices, but it still doesn't make me excited for the movie. It's infuriating to me that 2 weeks, 3 weeks after Harold Ramis passes is when they announce, hey, guess what? We're actually doing this. I think it's gross. I think it's disrespectful. And
But is it disrespectful if they always wanted to do it, is my question.
Well, if they always wanted to do it, why didn't
they do it 10 years ago then?
Because Bill Murray was being...
Well, guess what? Bill Murray's still not in it. So what's it matter? What's the difference?
Because they were originally trying to put Bill Murray in it.
Well, I know they wanted to.
After about 5 years, they probably could have figured out it wasn't going to happen, so they should have done it if they were going to do it.
And I agree with you. However, that was what they were trying to go for. It would be like having Harry Potter without Daniel Radcliffe.
Ghostbusters is a little more of an ensemble piece, I think, than that. I mean, the movie's called Harry Potter. Not Egon and some guys. I mean, it's called Ghostbusters. They're all together.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I know that, I mean, if it's a passing the torch thing, that's fine. There are, like, a multitude of different ideas you could use with it. It just, I know that they're trying to do it out of respect for Harold Ramis, and maybe his death will serve as a catalyst for finally getting the movie made. But it still is kind of infuriating that it would take that to do it just that quickly after that. And it does almost seem like they're capitalizing on it. I don't know. It's a mixed bag. Honestly, it would be cool if they actually did kind of a Star Trek thing where they rebooted it and tried to fit people that fit the same shoes, honestly. Do something like that might be kind of cool.
Yeah,
like
that might be all right.
Like a modern spin on it, because at this point, I don't know if the actors would have the same kick. I mean, it has been, 2 decades?
Then why not just do what they did with 21 Jump Street? It's like,
about 30 years.
It still takes place in the same universe, but with different characters, but they still offer a couple nudges saying that we haven't completely
Well, it sounds like that's what they are going to do.
And I think that's going to work, especially if it's in the hands of Phil Lord and Chris Miller.
Yeah, it could be fun. I mean, it's possible.
I guess we'll see. I mean, it's set for summer 2016, so...
But are they going to call it Ghostbusters 3? Like, really?
Yeah, if it's a reboot, they should... That's a good point. They should call it something else.
Because they said they're leaning more towards reboot, which kind of makes me wonder,
right.
Don't call it Ghostbusters 3 then.
All right, well, we'll see what happens come summer 2016, I guess.
Yep.
Guess so.
All right, for now, that is the show. This was very weird doing it backwards.
Yeah.
But in a strange way, fun, yes.
Yeah.
If you liked it.
Something a little different. All right, yeah, and we'll throw one more reminder out there about the old classic slot. Every month we'll be doing at least one old classic chosen by you guys. So get your suggestions to us on the Facebook group, which is Film Fanatics with an exclamation point, and we post our 5-word reviews there every week as well. And you can also just comment on the YouTube channel. And if you have not subscribed to that yet, we would love for you to do that. Joe has his own channel as well. What's going on there?
Oh, I'm just doing some weekly chapter reviews now, because I know that some people wanted me to actually review some manga and some current anime series. So I'm trying to keep on track with some of the more recent stuff. And I believe I should have a video that I did with the collaboration with a friend of mine called Top 10 Great Archenemies in Fiction. So,
ooh, that sounds good.
Should be a cool video.
Yeah, very cool. All right, well, that is going to do it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.